Welcome to the Mylan Pharmaceutical story, Bleeding Blue. This podcast is about the rise and fall of the number one American generic company, Mylan Pharmaceuticals, from 1961 to 2021. This is also about Bleeding Blue and their wonderful stories. As co-founder of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, Mike Puskar used to say, "Don't confuse kindness with weakness." This podcast should scare all Americans on so many levels. Let's start at the beginning.
Hello, Rich Stupar. I hear that you are going to give us the history of Mylan Pharmaceuticals back in the old days.
Back in the old days, I love that term. It's difficult to recap 45 years, but I'll give you some highlights as best I can. I'm Richard Stupar, ex-Vice President of Purchasing for Mylan Pharmaceuticals. It was an honor and a privilege to be employed by Mylan and Mylan Pushkar for more than 40 years. In 1956, the total population of Mylan's employment was 10 people. Our product line consisted of various penicillin dosage forms and numerous multivitamin and mineral preparations. Our reputation had grown in the industry, and in 1969, Park Davis became the first major brand company to employ us to manufacture products for them. They were followed by Robbins, SmithKline & French, Bristol, Wyeth, Mallinckrodt, Lederle, Squibb, Pfizer, Abbott, etc. Word was that if Mylan was producing your product, you could sleep at night. Well, that said a lot, didn't it? I should mention that my discussion involved only the Morgantown facility. This operation was under the leadership of Mylan Pushkar. In 1970, the FDA instigated a new procedure authorizing abbreviated new drug applications. Mylan was also the first pioneering foreign plant inspections. We traveled to Europe 37 times during my tenure to inspect the manufacturers of our active pharmaceutical ingredient. Again, Mylan was the first. Next, we skip to 1985. Maxide new drug application was approved, not an abbreviated new drug application. Mylan, under Mr. Pushkar's direction, became the first true generic manufacturer to obtain a full FDA, Food and Drug Administration, approved new drug application product. Now it's 1994, and again Mylan was granted another new drug application. This time it's for the orphan drug product called Cystadone. Again, the first generic drug company to ever obtain a new drug application for orphan drug. Cystinosis was a disease which affected 400 kids worldwide. They seldom lived past their teenage years. These kids had to drink a liquid. Mylan formulated a product, a one-day dosage capsule form. These children now are married and have kids of their own. Wow. I mean, I just got chills just telling you about the story. Anyway, Mylan had a global reputation for honesty and integrity for over 45 years. Mylan held the longest established record of more than 20 years without an FDA recall issue amongst the generic and brand history. Think about that, over 20 years with no major FDA recall. Other companies had them. Most people don't realize what their pharmacy products would cost if it were not for the generic industry. Mylan's employees were called Mylan family employees. We enjoyed summer picnics, quarter parties, turkeys on Thanksgiving, April 1st bonuses, Secretary Day lunches, Christmas parties, softball teams, bowling teams, tennis teams, West Virginia football and basketball tickets, and most popular, tailgating. When you have such gatherings, people from all different departments get to mingle together and know each other better. That's why I became the Mylan family employees. Mylan contributed so much to so many. It's people, numerous charities, West Virginia University, etc. There are plenty of good people through blood, Mylan blue. The people. Mike Puskar. If you met Mike Puskar, you were his friend. And all of the people that worked at Mylan worked there because they loved the job. And we all worked overtime, and we all had a great time developing products, working on weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays. Our employees will always be remembered that they were responsible for Mylan becoming the #1 generic manufacturer in the world. In the world, yes. Mr. Mylan Pushkar knew most of these people. How could that be? We now have 2,000 employees. He thrived on walking through the plant on numerous occasions and chit-chatting with most of the people there. We Mylaneers, yes, Mylaneers, respected that. Mylan will be honored, cherished, and remembered and loved by thousands. Its legacy will never die. Mr. Mylan Puskar will live forever. I had to choke up on that. I'm sorry, but
You're Rich. I'm right with you, baby. I'm right with you.
it was unbearably sad for many hundreds of Mylaneers who contributed to Mylan's success story when the plant was closed. This was the result of the Mylan-Upjohn merger, which was not part of Mr. Mylan Puskar's legacy. I want to close with one of the many stories that I became aware of regarding Mike and his philanthropy. When visiting his hometown in Youngstown, he saw a jar in a pharmacy asking for donations to help little Helen with her kidney operation. He gave the jar to the owner and with instructions that he would cover the cost: surgery, recovery, and home care.
Rich and my father were more than boss and employee. They were friends. I mean, my dad was friends with all of his employees. If there was ever a problem or an issue, and Rich, you can back me up on this one. If there was ever a personal issue or something, my father was there for you as well, not just as an employee, but as a friend that needed help.
Oh my God. He was the first one in my office, or the first one to call when there was a situation that occurred in my life. Unbelievable. Yeah, that's just unbelievable.
He knew his employees. He knew their names. He knew their parents' names. He knew when their kids were graduating from high school. It was Mylan Pharmaceuticals was my dad's family. He didn't walk in with bodyguards. He didn't walk in with an attitude. It was like a family reunion to him every day. And he had to make sure his family was always taken care of. And like I said, there will be stories from Bleeding Blue that will share what they counteracted with my dad uh, and how much they miss him dearly. But so that's the reason for this tribute. This podcast is for his employees that never got to speak. My dad was known as a philanthropist, and his big contribution was with WVU, and he donated altogether $22 million of his own money. Most people think it went to, the rumor is, it went to the athletic department so my dad could get his own box. Got news for you. Furthest from the truth. And Rich, you can vouch for that one. He donated $22 million to West Virginia Foundation. $14.5 million went to the Department of Athletics. $5.5 million went toward academics and to establish a leader scholarship, which to this day, college students are still going to school on my father's name scholarship. I went to get some information on my father on philanthropy and what he donated to. I literally got 2 spreadsheets with over 200 different things on companies or organizations on them. I will do some of these, and then I'll tell you more of what my dad was known for that no one really knew about. He was known for helping Special Olympics, Alzheimer's, Betty Pushkar Breast Cancer Center, which is my mother, West Virginia Sheriff's Association, West Virginia Camp for Children, Mon General Hospital, United Way, schools and churches all over the state of West Virginia. He had not one specific thing, anybody, anything that needed help. That's where that's where he went. But what people don't understand is most of my dad's philanthropy no one even knew about. And like you said, Rich, one with the jar with the child that he paid for all that surgery. That's what my dad did that no one knew about. He had no problems if he saw a jar and it interested him. He would find out how to help that child. He did this all over the United States, and he also, through Mylan Pharmaceuticals, donated. And Rich, you can vouch for if I have this correct. He would give free medicines to third world countries that could not afford penicillins and antibiotics.
Absolutely. When the life of the product became, products are only approved for 2 years. So when we had inventory that approached 2 years, we would volunteer and send those products around the world because they could still be used.
It started out when my father was in elementary school, and his mother, which Serbian Baba, my grandmother, there was a paper boy that used to deliver the papers around the neighborhood. He was very poor, him and his 2 siblings. He went to elementary school with dad. So my grandmother made sure my dad took 4 lunches every single day to school to feed this little paper boy and his 2 siblings. They did this for years. My father said that's how this started. That's when dad realized you treat everybody the same. There is no rich, poor, there's good, bad. It makes no difference to him. And Mylan Employees is a good example of that. It didn't matter if you were the janitor or vice president. You were all treated the same. Rich, I thank you so much for sharing your story. Unfortunately, there's not many more of you guys left. So you are one in a million. I've known you since I was a child, and I thank you so much. And I think my dad would have been proud.
I think you're crying.
I'm trying not to. Can you tell me how many years you worked at Mylan?
I worked at Mylan from 1988 to 1999, and then I consulted for the company for 2 years after that. I came from Pittsburgh. I was an outsider. Again, I had a great time there, but it was not that long. It was only 11 years, 13 years counting the consulting. It's like I tell my students, I teach at WVU now, and I tell my students that I did not create the history at Mylan. I just happened to be along for the ride at a very good time.
Those were good times. Was there any story or anything you'd like to share with us, Frank?
There's a bunch of stories I'd like to share. I knew that Mylan was a special place. The first time I ever came to know Mylan, I was an auditor for Touche Ross. I came down to Morgantown, and the very first day in Morgantown, I locked my keys in the trunk. So I'm stuck at the hotel. I couldn't get to the office. And I called Gary Mayfield, the controller at Mylan, and I told him I locked my keys in the trunk. He said, no problem. We'll have somebody out there to get him out in a second. And he sent somebody over. I don't know whether it was Jimmy Fulmer or Bob Pfizer, somebody. Somebody came out and they popped my trunk open and got my keys out. That same day, my first day working at Mylan, working for Touche Ross at Mylan, I met your dad. And, you know, here's me, a lowly auditor, and here's your dad, the president of the company, and he sat down with me and talked with me, and I remember going home after that first week and telling my wife that someday I was going to work at Mylan. I didn't know when, but I knew that Mylan was a company that there's something special going on there. And sure enough, 4 or 5 years later, I got the call from Roy McKnight. He and Mike had decided that they wanted me to be the principal accounting officer for the company. And so I started in 1988, and again, it was a very special time. I tell my students this, and I try to pass on the Mylan legacy, but it wasn't just your dad. Your dad was an incredible leader. Okay, a really incredible leader. He had a charisma about him that when he walked into a room, you just knew it. You didn't even have to see him. You just knew Mike Pushkar's in the building. Not too many people have that. Very, very few people have that. I've never met anybody else like him. I was a Mike Puskar wannabe. From the day I first met him, you know, I started wearing cufflink shirts and just, I was a Mike Puskar wannabe like a lot of other people. He had that charisma. But from the start, Roy McKnight brought Mike Puskar back to the company, you know, in 1976. Roy McKnight, God bless him, he was a pretty smart man, and he knew that this generic pharmaceutical business was the thing of the future, but he also knew that he didn't know anything about the pharmaceutical industry and manufacturing in particular, so he brought your dad back. And
yeah, I know.
Together, they were a phenomenal team. I had the honor and the pleasure of working directly with Mike and Roy. And my dad gave me a smile, and he says, know who your boss is. So I asked Roy McKnight, who's my boss? And Roy thought about it for a second, and he said, when you're in Morgantown, Mike's your boss. When you're in Pittsburgh, I'm your boss. And I knew I was in trouble. But together, they were just a tremendous, tremendous management team. And then they surrounded themselves with really, really good people. Sonny Todd and Dana Barnett were the executive vice presidents. They surrounded themselves with really good people. Cheryl Bloom, John O'Donnell.
Wow.
I'm going to rattle off a bunch of names here, and if I miss people, I apologize. Somebody fill in the blanks. But on the manufacturing side, we had Lou DeBone, you had Billy Ogden, John Hamrick, Jimmy Fulmer, Byron Witt. Just tremendous, tremendous people. And it carried over into the support functions. I was fortunate enough to work in a department with the greatest controller of all time, a guy named Gary Mayfield,
Wow.
who made my job ridiculously easy. And then I had people like Cindy Dalton and Gary Spar and Marcia Moran and Nancy Newland and Jack Riffle and Jim Tibbs and Art Puskar. This is just my department. I can rattle off their names.
But you know what, Frank? This is, and I know almost all the people you're talking about because, of course, I grew, as a child, grew up with them being around. even though everyone had different departments and everybody had different titles, vice president, president, CEO, et cetera, et cetera. With these gentlemen and ladies, it made no difference what your title was. Nobody was better than the other. No one was above the other title. It was a bunch of people that were good, hardworking people that all believed in my dad. They believed in Mylan Pharmaceuticals, and they worked as a group to make it successful. Like I said, there was no, it wasn't like, oh, here comes the president. They didn't care about that. It wasn't that type of company. It was a company of, if I succeed, we all succeed.
Everybody did their job and they did it well.
Exactly.
That goes all the way, I hate to even use the term down to the level of the janitor. The janitor was an incredibly important position at Mylan, and the janitor did their job better than any other janitor anywhere else.
Exactly. And my father had utmost respect for everybody. And there's a story about that actually, where she introduced, I can't tell other people's stories, but she introduced her dad as just the janitor, and my dad corrected her real quick and told her, do you know how important your job is at our pharmaceutical company? I mean, she said, from that day on, I will never ever say I'm just. Well, Frank, I cannot thank you enough. I've got to let you go, and you have a good day.
Okay, you too. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I just called in to tell you what Bleeding Blue and Mylan family meant to me.
I thank you.
Yeah. So, you didn't really know, and so I get through this without actually crying. You didn't really know what Mylan family truly meant. You heard it in orientation on the first day on the job. You heard about Mylan family, and you truly didn't know what it meant until something happened, and then it really showed. But in 2005, I was on a motorcycle and had an accident and lost my leg. And that's when you really knew you had family. And the support that poured into me just days. I mean, I didn't even know it was coming in. My family told me later on. My oldest sister actually said, Dawn, you wouldn't believe the support and the calls coming in from your job. She said, I'm amazed. I'm astonished. I can't believe it. And I don't know how many weeks I had the tube in and couldn't talk and was in ICU. But when I finally got out of ICU and was in my room, my husband came in and he said, Dawn, he said, Mr. Pushkar wants to put an elevator in the house for you. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he said, he's sending a couple engineers over tomorrow, some contractors, to see where the best place is. And that he's offered to take care of all of the expense. The contractors and the engineers are going to donate their time. And I was amazed. I didn't really know what to say. But the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? It's okay. I had 17 steps that went from my downstairs area up to my living area. And I said, it's okay. I'll climb those steps. I'll be all right. And my husband said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. Please tell them thank you. But, I'll be okay. And there were times, don't get me wrong, carrying in grocery bags that I thought, and my husband said, I bet you wish you'd let him do that now, huh? But yeah, I thanked him. But so that's what Mylan family and Bleeding Blue was all about to me. Is the show. Now that's when your dad was there.
Do you mind? I don't mean to interrupt you. Would you tell me what happens after Dad was forced to retire in 2009?
Yeah, so that was your dad. That was Bleeding Blue. That was Mylan family. After 2009, after your dad no longer was in the plant, there was no longer, we still were Mylan family, and they hated that. We still carried on Mike's tradition, and they hated that. They no longer were Mylan, Bleeding Blue, Mylan family. I went from being offered an elevator in my home to fighting for a handicapped spot to park in because there were only 4 handicapped spots available in the entry where you come into the locker room, clock in and out. There were like 10 down in the old area where we used to go in and out and clock in. And I went to them numerous times and was like, hey, we need more spots up here. And they said that they were under the guideline of how many spots. And I said, I understand you're under the guideline, but you've got all of your spots down in the old area. You've only got 4 up in the front part where your workers are coming in and out, that they wouldn't do it. And when I came in the morning, those 4 spots were always taken by midnight. So I would park in the parking garage. Now, if you could get a spot outside of the 5th floor, which was the cafeteria area, you were good. But if those spots were full, which they usually were, you had to pretty much go to the top roof. Now, there's an elevator that you could ride down. But I don't know how many times at the end of working an 8 or 10 hour day that I came out and the elevator was not working. So I would have to climb 4 flights of steps up the parking garage to get to the roof, and literally would be in tears. But at the end of the day, it was rough, I would go to HR. This is what's happening. This is what I had to do yesterday. So after doing it several times, don't even know how many, I finally went to them one day and said, look, I will no longer park on the roof of the parking garage. If I come in and there's not a spot out front and there's not one on the 5th floor outside the door, I will not ride that elevator and take the chance that it's broke down at the end of the day. I said, if this happens, I'm going to park along the wall. So there was a wall that took you back and up and around to the warehouse. But where I would park, a tractor trailer could get past me. That's two tractor trailers could drive past me. I said, I'm going to park there along the wall. When midnight shift leaves here at 10 after 7, I'm going to move my car into one of the spots. Well, they advised me not to do that. That I was like, I'm not riding that all day. I'm not doing this anymore. And I went to them numerous times asking over and over. So I told my supervisor, that, hey, I'm going out and move my car. He'd be like, okay. And I did it with no problem until I got called one day and they said, it's been brought to our attention that you have come in and then you have gone to your car and moved your car. And I said, yes. I said, I've talked to you all about that many, many times. Long story short, I was walked out. Pending an investigation. They said.
So you got fired because this is unbelievable. You got fired because you are handicapped. You couldn't get a handicapped parking space, but they wouldn't let you really park anywhere else. So when you finally did move your car, where there was finally a handicapped place open, they fired your ass because you got out and moved your car to the handicapped spot.
Yes. Yeah, you were not allowed to go to your vehicle. Okay. You were not allowed to go to your vehicle once you were in uniform. Okay, but that was because of working in the powder and all that.
I understand.
And that's what they said to me. And I said, as a janitor, I worked in the supply cage. You would send me to Lowe's to pick up product or things you needed. And I'd come back in my uniform, as a janitor. Maintenance was excluded. The maintenance workers were excluded from doing that, going into the parking lot. But they didn't exclude me as a janitor.
This was after my father was forced out, right?
Well after your dad. Well after. But yeah, that's how, and another thing your dad did for me. So after my accident in 2005, it was 1 year and 1 month later, I actually was back to work. But before getting back to work, I was released. The doctor said, she could go back to work. I needed a little bit of help, like in what area I could work. They wouldn't sign me off to go back to Collins Ferry, where I was a janitor there, because I couldn't sweep and mop stairwells or snow blowing or snow removal in the winter. So they had to find me a adequate place. And I kept checking in. And head of HR, and I can't even tell you who it was at the time, would say to me, well, I understand you need a wheelchair. I understand you need crutches. I was like, no, I don't need none of that. I did request a scooter to get me from point A to point B, because that building inside is over 1 million square foot, or a 1 million square foot, I believe it was. So finally, after talking on the phone numerous times with HR, I finally walked in to his office. I introduced myself, and I said, we've talked numerous times on the phone. And he's like, yes. And I said, I just wanted you to see me. And I told him, I said, I just would like a scooter. That's all I need. And still got to run around. Well, the guy that worked with me at the time from Hanger on my leg, there was a young man that worked in that office with him, and he knew your dad. And he ran into your dad, and your dad said, hey, how's that little girl? I was 43 years old. How's that little girl doing? And he said, well, she's doing great, and she's ready to come back to work. And he said, was she back? And he said, no, evidently she's getting the runaround. He said, what for? He said, they said they don't have no place for her. And your dad said, really? I got a call 2 days later that I would return back to work come Monday morning.
Yeah, there were some people probably in a lot of trouble for that.
Yeah, I got a call because he had actually said to this guy, I'm in that building every morning. Don't tell me there's no place for that little girl. Little girl. I was 43. Yeah, that was the difference. I mean, we bled blue. We were Mylan family. Your dad was everything to us. They hated that because when Robert Corey took over, we saw it on the first day when they took down his picture in the office. He had a large, down in the main entry.
They took down all his pictures.
There was a huge picture of your dad, and my daughter was like, wow, they must really like him. When I came in on the first day of the job to pick up my tags, she was in 5th grade. And who's that, Mom? And I said, that's the co-founder of Mylan. It's Mike Puskar. She said, wow, they must really like him. I said, we do really like him. But, yeah, after Mike was gone, his picture came down. We saw as workers, and I'm sure if other people call in, they will verify that as soon as your dad no longer was in that building, they were trying to do away with anything and anybody that was associated with the Mylan before Robert Corey stepped in. He didn't want anything that was Mike Puskar. It was all his glory now. And he didn't like it because we continued the Mylan family, the Mylan Bleed Blue. It's quality, not quantity, and from that movement on, it was just quality. Yeah.
Cannot thank you enough for calling. I would love for you to share more stories in the future, and I thank you so much, and you have a great day. Hi, my name is Johanna Pushkar. I am Mylan Mike Pushkar's daughter. Mylan Mike Puskar was the co-founder of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, along with his best friend Don Panos. They met in the 50s in the military. They were in the Army. They were stationed in Japan. They became lifelong friends at that time. It was his calling, but it was my dad's dream to start a generic company in the United States. In 1961, Mylan started in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, in an old abandoned skating rink. In 1965, they came to Morgantown, West Virginia. The reason why they ended up in Morgantown, West Virginia is because no other town would take them. No other state would take them except for Morgantown. Don Panos left in 1969 and became highly successful on his own right with other things that he had accomplished in his life. My father and Don always stayed as best friends and kept in contact. Before Don left, my father and Don would go from house to house to house to sell Mylan stock for $1. There were two teachers that were living together, two ladies. They took all their money out of their savings and had faith in my dad and in my dad and Don Panos with Mylan Pharmaceuticals. This was back in the 60s. When they passed away, they were multi-millionaires. Don Panos in 1969 left and became highly successful on his own. In 1973, my father left Mylan Pharmaceuticals. We moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. He worked for ICN. After we were there for about 3-4 years, and then from there, from 1975 to 76, we moved to Dublin, Ireland, and Dad and Don Panos joined each other again with a company called Elan, ELAN. The deal was, when I was in junior high, wherever my parents were living is where we were staying, because between Morgantown and White Sulphur and Princeton, West Virginia, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and the Virgin Islands and Ireland, my parents thought it was time to settle down. So junior high was a good time. We were in Ireland. I was thrilled. I went to an all-boys boarding school that went co-ed the year that I went to school there. I was the only American girl. I loved it. I thought my future was set. I was wrong. In 1976, Roy McKnight called my father. At the time, he was the chairman of Mylan, and told my dad that Mylan was in financial despair. They needed his help. I'll never forget, my parents were in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, and my dad walked in and said, "Betty, pack your bags. We're moving." And my mom was, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going back to the United States." Mom was happy. She missed her family. She was a family of 8, and she wanted to go home. So with that being said, Mom said, "Okay, Mike, where are we going?" He said, "We're going back to Morgantown, West Virginia." My mom dropped. I was like, "No, let me stay." I offered to stay with the Panoses. My dad said, "Absolutely not. You're getting on the plane." And I did. My dad came back to Mylan Pharmaceuticals. It was renamed as Mylan. When my dad left, it was Milan, which is how you spell my dad's name, Milan, Pushkar. When we got to Morgantown, I asked my father, I said, "Are you going to change the name of the company?" He asked me, "Why would I do that?" And I said, "Well, because your name is M-I, not M-Y. He looked at me and said, "Johanna, it's a goddamn name." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "It's not about the name of the company. It's about the way it's run and the people that are there to make it a success. That's what is important, not a damn name." Caught that lesson real quick. So he kept it as Mylan. With that being said, My father was known as a philanthropist, which we've gone through before. But let me tell you one thing that I think is very important to say here, and this is my opinion. This is what a philanthropist is not. It's one that takes credit for other successes and accomplishments. And I'll give you a good example of that. I was at a one of my dad's best friends bar slash restaurant called the Old Mill Club. I was talking to a guy, and he asked what my dad did, and I said I was the founder of Mylan Pharmaceuticals. My dad was there, but standing behind me. My dad let me talk to this gentleman for a while, and then after the guy left, my dad looked at me and said, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Don't you ever do that again." And I said, "What did I do?" He said, "You said I'm the founder of Mylan." And I said, "You are?" He said, "No, I'm not." He said, "I'm the co-founder." He said, "You never, ever take credit for what somebody else has accomplished." He said, "You never, ever call me the founder." Point noted. With that being said, on my father's mausoleum, due to his suggestion, it says Mylan Mike Pushkar, co-founder of Mylan Pharmaceuticals. So he meant what he said. A philanthropist also does not treat employees a different way when the co-founder of the company is present and when they are not. A philanthropist does not brag on being a philanthropist to secure their insecurities. Most of my dad's philanthropy came outside of people knowing what he was doing. For example, the little girl that needed help donating money in jars. I found this out. I did not know this. My father used to look for these jars, and without anyone ever knowing, he would help these families out. It did not matter what state, what city, what county, it was a child needing help. A philanthropist also does not enrich themselves by destroying others. Philanthropy is selfless. It is not narcissistic. People always that worked at Mylan Pharmaceuticals always said, "We bleed blue. We will always bleed blue. We are a family." And I never really thought much about it until about 2 years ago. A friend of mine came over that worked at Mylan for years and said to me, we were talking about the closing of Mylan, and she said to me, she said, "Johanna, they can do whatever they want to do." She said, "We will always bleed blue." And I looked at her and I said, "Barb, what does that mean?" She said, "Johanna, when you walk in Mylan Pharmaceuticals," she said, "you are a family. Everyone takes care of everybody else, in and out of Mylan." She said, "It does not end in here." She said, "Your dad made sure that we had other things to do." She said, we would have parties for people at Mylan that had been there for years. We had a bowling league. We had a softball team. She said, "We were family. If anyone needed another one of us, we were still there. We were always together in work and out of work." She said it was so funny. She said it took years. People were dying to get into Mylan. And they said after my dad retired, forced to retire, that everybody couldn't wait to get out. I finally understood what she was saying. I will never be bleeding blue because I didn't work there, but they have accepted me as their family. And as the co-founder's daughter, that is a compliment because they usually don't want to be around you. I found out about a year ago that there is a private group and it's all bleeding blue. And I thought, well, that's good, to support each other. Usually when a company closes, everyone says, "Hey, it was nice meeting you, whatever. I'll catch up, have lunch, whatever." And they go on their own way. Not these guys. There's 1,200 people, and every day it grows, and it is Mylan Bleeding Blue. And they keep in touch. They help each other get jobs. If someone needs help at home, if someone hasn't heard from another Bleeding Blue member, someone checks on that member to make sure they're okay. So a friend of mine that I know since high school that worked at Mylan for years said, "Why don't you join this group?" And I said, I don't work at Mylan. I said, A, and B, I'm the boss's daughter. I'm probably the last person these people want to hear from. He looked at me and said, apply. You might be surprised. So I did. In 12 hours, I was accepted. I literally felt like I was going home. My phone blew up. I was so welcomed. And most of the people have never met me. But this is what Mylan Pharmaceuticals was about. This is what Mylan Pharmaceuticals family was about. These people loved each other, and they still love each other. It is absolutely amazing to me how you can have thousands of people throughout the years in a company that still, after hard times, these people cannot afford anymore for their children to go to college. Some of these people are working 2 jobs just to make up for Mylan Pharmaceutical closing due to 3 greedy son of a bitches. But they're working together. They're helping each other out. And that is the most important part. I love Mylan Pharmaceuticals, even though I never worked there. I love these people. They've accepted me. And it is a shame that this company was destroyed. The number my father and his employees made Mylan Pharmaceuticals from due to Maxide, the number 1 generic company in the United States and number 2 in the world. And people that could have stopped this sat back and let it happen. I found out that the group that everybody belongs to together, I figured they started it 2 years after Mylan closed. I thought, oh, cool, I was wrong. They started this right after my dad died. They needed love, they needed support, and they had each other. So this private group has been going on 11 years. Which brings me to the note. For you son of a bitches out there, you have employees that hate going to work. You have employees that could care less if they're there or not. They're there because they have to have a job. They don't put all their energy into what they're doing, which makes you suffer. But that's okay because you leave with the money and the fancy cars. You guys don't have a clue on how to run a good based company, because Mylan Pharmaceuticals is a good example how you don't have to treat your employees like shit so you can get further. And for the people that brag out there, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a CEO, I own this, let me explain something to you. If it wouldn't be for the people that work for you, you wouldn't be where you're at. So I highly suggest you start thinking a little bit on how you treat the people. Thank you. I hope you guys will join me on the podcast number 2.